Welcome to today's Energy Central webcast entitled, Look Before You Leap, Create a Digital Twin to Simulate the Impacts of Digital Transformation on Your People, Systems, and Data. A few housekeeping notes we'd like to mention. For best results in viewing this presentation, we recommend using a wired high-speed internet connection, as wireless connections can be unpredictable. If you cannot get adequate sound from your computer speakers, you may dial into the audio portion using the telephone number listed in the right-hand panel of your interface under the audio section. Following the presentation, we'll have a question and answer period. You may submit your questions at any time using the question interface on your screen. I'm happy to introduce today's speakers. We have Dave Harris, Chief Executive Officer at Magic Minds, and Neil Calvert, Chief Executive Officer and co-inventor of Link. I'd now like to turn the floor over to our first speaker, Dave Harris. Dave, welcome to the event. You have the floor.
Terrific. Thank you, PJ. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for attending. Today, we're going to talk about the digital twin concept as it applies to your organization, specifically your people, systems, and data, and how you can apply this concept to guide you through the digital transformation initiatives that you're going through now. So if you look at this list, I'm sure some of you are living this list right now. Transformation is happening everywhere, particularly in the utility space. I'm guessing most of you are in the middle of a transformation project now that's related to one of these challenges. You're getting pressure from customers, regulators, shareholders, new industries. And in spite of all the advancements in our field, it's still very difficult to make data and fact-based decisions that'll ensure we meet the needs of our business and our customers. So this next slide you're looking at illustrates the typical kind of current way of doing business. Tends to be too slow, too risky, there's a lot of hope involved, and more often than not, projects fail or go way over budget to get the value promised. Many times we ignore status quo or the current state, as is state, because it takes too long and no one likes modeling how we do it today. This means we usually don't have a baseline for our change. We don't really know where we're moving from. We're entirely focused on the shiny new thing that we're trying to move to, right? Technology takes the lead in this conversation. Oftentimes we forget there are actual people in our business who probably hate the thought of change. We don't do nearly enough to help them adapt to what's coming. This usually creates tension and political barriers that become pretty big, and the business suffers as a result. And if you think about the business case in the ROI stage, the business case process is slow and expensive. You're likely to have many of those going on at the same time, which reflects in sunk costs that you can't recover. So when you're finally presented with business cases, you assess them and prioritize them based on your understanding of the expected benefits, or you don't. Politics go into play, and whichever, whoever's yelling the loudest often gets the attention, right? But a lot of times the business case does not provide enough content, or the content is presented in a way that management doesn't understand. So management says no, or worse, they say nothing at all. And essentially you're stuck in analysis paralysis, concerned for your own future, your reputation, afraid that you'll make the wrong decision. It becomes easier to accept status quo and continue on as before, and change or transformation gets put into that it's too hard basket, right? So looking at, if you consider the tools we have access to, it's not hard to see why we have these challenges. You have spreadsheets, Gantt charts, project plans, Kanban boards, Post-it notes, whiteboards. It's kind of sad to think the greatest innovation in our planning process in the last 10 years has been the addition of the camera to our mobile phone, so we can take a picture of our whiteboard and take it back to our desk and make a slide to share it with somebody else. We have self-driving cars, but we're trapped when it comes to agile planning tools that accelerate us to a point of action. So these tools, while they serve a purpose, they're the language of process or the language of design or language of IT or the language of architecture. None of them are the language of business. So you wonder why decision makers struggle to understand the content that's being presented to them. In fact, we know that in a Gartner survey, 87% of decision makers are non-tech savvy, and yet we use these other languages to speak to them and expect them to understand it. So there's a lot, in dealing with all these, challenges, there's a lot of opportunity out there to improve things. If we continue to think at the pace dictated by the tools we were talking about, how will we ever know which one of these things we should be looking at to implement and which we can safely ignore? In order to address these opportunities and still run the day-to-day business, we need to think and act differently. So where do we start? This is where things typically go off the rails right out of the gate. Sometimes the technology is selected before impacts are considered. Someone liked a demo, so they buy on a whim without considering integration or change management issues that inevitably come with new technology investment. Or at the opposite end of the spectrum, you recognize you need to change, but in addition to your day job, you're getting asked by management to provide detailed business case, ROI, TCO, all of these things that can be difficult to put together in short order and still do your day-to-day. So maybe you pay a consultant to do a 6-month study where you pay $1 million for a 200-page report that recommends you buy a $100,000 piece of software, right? I'm sure some of you have been there before. So we have these challenges, we have these issues. I want to put a couple inspirational quotes up. Yes, we have these, but in confusion comes opportunity, and we need to think differently. So how do we do that? How do we break down our cognitive biases, even if we don't know we're carrying them? We need diversity in the way we think about our organization so we can overcome the barriers and day-to-day challenges. So, with the pace of change that we're subjected to, there's never been more need for a change in thinking than there is today. So again, how do we get this started? We propose you look at these questions. In the first one, it's understand how you operate today, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. You have to understand, complete an assessment of the status quo. And then you start looking at how you should operate in the future. And then the second one in terms is looking at it with a value lens. And this goes beyond simply calculating a dollar figure for how much it costs to do something or how much an asset is worth. Value is influenced by many factors in the organization. We're going to come back to that later. Neil's going to get into that in more detail. And then there's communication, which I alluded to earlier. If you find yourself getting blank stares from executives when you present your case, it's usually because you're speaking the wrong language of process, architecture, or IT. We need to be speaking the language of business, keep it simple. And then the last one is around being data-driven. In many cases, technologies are selected based on the gut feel of a key stakeholder or existing relationship with a selected vendor. Sometimes it works, more often than not, it doesn't. So what we recommend is think a little bit differently, assess the impact before you commit. So we say invest thousands before committing millions. Engage your internal talent, foster innovation, and measure value by building a digital twin. So what is a digital twin exactly? So if you think about the origins of the concept, it's been around actually a long time. If you think about, if you recall the Apollo 13 ordeal in the movie, the part after the explosion and the CO2 levels are rising and to life-threatening levels, and it doesn't look good. The guys on the ground actually had copies of all the equipment they had in space and needed to come up with a hack to solve the issue. So they went through it, they documented the procedures, implemented it, and everybody gets home safely. Great story, right? Great movie. This is essentially the analog inspiration for the digital twin concept. So if you fast forward to today and think of IoT on your network devices, sensors from those devices in the fields and real-time data on the performance of that device. Then a digital twin in the form of software take that data and simulate various scenarios so you can support things like network planning and growth planning, and then also drive preventive maintenance activities. So building on these ideas, what we're talking about today is the concept of digital twin applied to your organization. This includes the people, the actions they take to deliver value, the systems they use, the information they create and or use to generate business value. So how does this actually work in practice? I'm going to hand it off now to Neil to explain it a little more and get into the nitty-gritty.
Thanks very much, Dave. It's great to be here today. I'm now going to spend a bit of time really talking through what do we really mean by the digital twin of an organization, and how can we make this a reality inside the organization, gain the insights that we need from this modeling in order to be able to do safe transformation confidently. So really we need to start by thinking about what is an organization. And we've managed to distill it down to 4 key entities, which are the work that gets done, the data and information that supports that work or is created by that work, the people who are doing the work, and then the systems involved in all of that. So systems that are used by people, systems that might automate work, and systems supplying information. So there are 2 key aspects to this. One is really the flow of information through the organization as it creates assets that we require to deliver business outcomes. That's where the business value is generated. So here you might start thinking in your own organization, there's a load of work that gets done. There are actions that happen. Some of these might be contained entirely in business process models or other formula that people use in order to do their work. They require content to be able for those actions to be performed, and when those actions are performed, more content is created, and ultimately you'll be delivering something that allows you to create that business value and deliver that business outcome. And you have people inside the organization, they're doing this work and they're using tools to do that. Those tools can automate the work as well. So this is where we might see a system having been coded to do something on receipt of the correct data. And the systems are everywhere supplying information. And we're deliberate about using the word system rather than technology because, again, think about your own business. There are probably some systems in use which are paper orientated. It's not really technology. There could be pen and paper, and certainly in the health sector we see lots of paper. There are still clipboards on the end of beds which are handed over shift change with patient notes on. So there's an example where the system is the paper, the pen, and the clipboard. So I want to make this concept a bit more real. Here is a piece of text, just a discussion that might go on inside an organization when they're considering documenting what they do. So we step right back here. This is a coffee roaster for a cafe. If we read through this, you'll see it's a pretty typical kind of conversation. So we're talking about Nancy and Paul. Nancy's checking the production plan for the day, which is in Excel. It's been compiled by Paul, the wholesale manager. It contains a list of coffee batches to be roasted, the final weight that's been ordered, and the inventory that is held inside the organization. The purchase orders from cafes and wholesale customers are combined when the production plan's drafted, and they do that because they don't want to roast individual batches. They want to bring them together, otherwise it's not economical to do that. So Paul just adds up the orders and a single roast is done for each coffee batch. So it's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of content in there. So now let's think about the people, the systems, the actions, and the information that's being described in this paragraph. So if we color code this piece of text, it looks like this. So we can start to see who the people are, the systems that are being used, the content that's created, the actions that are taking place, the work that's being done. Now we can take this knowledge that we now have just through this conversation, and if we have a structure way of being able to record that, to document it, that's digital from birth, that can be shared and understood, we can very quickly turn this into content that we can use through the organization. So let's take a quick look at that. So there's the text, and this is the model. This is the type of diagramming that Link, our platform, enables an organization to do. And at first glance, you'd look at this and go, well, that's just a flow diagram. We call this an information flow model, which is the concept behind building the digital twin. The digital twin takes that information flow, but then considers the people and systems. So we can now map the text that we have directly to the entities that we're modeling inside the digital twin. So here's Nancy. This is the check action that she performs to produce that requires the production plan. So she needs the production plan in Excel to be able to perform her work in Excel. So you can begin to see how this language is made up. Here's Excel, the system that is being used by Nancy, but is also the container of some of this content. Here's the compile work that Paul does. So here's Paul, and so on through this text. We can see the final weight piece of information that's needed. We've got the inventory, we've got the production plan that's created. Here's the add action for Paul. So we can very quickly take what's often tacit knowledge that exists in people's heads that isn't documented in a structured way, and we can bring this into the model. Now, this means it's different from some of the other languages that Dave started talking about, because we're not filtering the content based on the technical requirement that we might have as a business analyst using BPMN, or an architect using some of those other architecture disciplines where we're interested in interface between systems. We're almost capturing the source content from which all of those other things can then be generated. And this allows us to follow a different process inside the organization. So we'll take a quick look at that. So our the flow of work that is enabled by thinking about building the digital twin is different from our current decision-making process. So we're able to capture the current state. I'm going to show you the tool and how quickly we can build these models. It is typically 10 times faster than following that traditional business case process where I rely on content to be created around a table. It's typically analog. As Dave said, the biggest technical revolution we've had in that process in the last decade has been we have smartphones connected to the internet and our email account that have a camera. So we can take the photo of the whiteboard, send it to ourselves. We can then create some content inside a diagramming tool later. But we end up with a reliance on an individual to interpret the content that was delivered in the meeting. And that takes time, and there are many iterations of that process until everyone's satisfied that they've been heard and that's been documented correctly. So if we can capture the current state really quickly, and we can do it almost in real time as the conversation's taking place, we can basically remove that rework from our organization. We want to then introduce the idea of value. We are doing valuable work inside our organizations. It's that valuable work that allows us to deliver our business value, which meets our KPIs inside the organization, our strategic objectives. So we want to start thinking about the value of the information that is being created that allows us to deliver those outcomes. And we're going to cover that in a bit of detail in just a while. So we use this information value consideration to provide a value lens through the whole organization. We want to understand the value of our people and the work they do, the systems that we use in order to enable our outcomes to be delivered. So this value lens is really the thing that changes our perception of the order that we need to do things inside the organization. Once we understand that value, we can look at where might we change. If we find areas inside our organization where we're less efficient than we'd like to be, and it's really high value to the whole of the organization, then that provides us with some prioritization insight. Let's change that first because of the impact it will have through the rest of the business. Once we've done that, we can start to experiment and simulate change inside the model. So we can build future states. More than one. We might want to think about the system that we're going to implement to remove paper from the business, and there might be 2 or 3 options. So we might build 2 or 3 future states, which allow us to communicate with the vendors about our expectation of their ability to help us, and we can use the models to do that. So future states allow us to qualify and quantify the change, build the ROI. If I know I'm going to save X million dollars and I know it takes a tenth of that cost to do the implementation, I can very quickly communicate that. And communication is the next part of the step. We're using a language which is simple. It only consists of those 4 elements. We use plain English to describe them. We can take that through the whole of the organization and have everybody understand. Culture is the #1 barrier to successful change. We've known that for a long, long time, which means actually it's not about can we implement technology successfully. It's about can we take people on the journey with us in a way where they support us, they don't become barriers themselves, and the whole culture of the organization can shift in order to take advantage of these things that we want to implement inside our business. And of course, really importantly, through this whole process, we are building the measures of success. So our future state sketches provide us with the numbers that we're trying to achieve in terms of cost, in terms of value, in terms of time, for creating the content in the new way to deliver our business values. This means we get to benefits realization very quickly. So all of that stacks up against the old way of decision making, which Dave covered earlier. It means we can approach this in a very different way, and really it's the introduction of this value conversation that allows us to do that. Value becomes the mechanism by which we can prioritize our change. So if we've got our current state, our as is, and we've got the value of the work that gets done inside the organization, and we simulate our future state, the to be state, we very quickly end up with the data points that allow us to break through that decision paralysis. If we communicate in the right way to our executive, we can help them say yes or no much faster than they otherwise can. But the most important thing is we help them make a decision either way. When we are happy with things, because the future state model is showing us that it's something we want to achieve, we can move to action very quickly. We've got all of the data to be able to measure the results. Even if we don't end up meeting our final targets, at least we know the processes that we've been through. We understand why we may not have hit our targets. We can modify our assumptions around the change, and then we can repeat what we're doing, which we get into that continuous improvement flow inside the business. So I do want to touch on value, because it's a conversation that is increasing in depth through the whole industry. Not just in the utility sector, across all sectors, really, anybody that's dealing with digital transformation and change. And we want to move value away from a conversation purely about financial outcome. It's not just about revenue. So here are some information value attributes that we want to start thinking about inside our business when we come to consider the value of these outputs that we create that allow us to deliver these business outcomes. So there are some objective and subjective categorizations and thought processes here, right from what's the validity of the data? Is it well represented? Is it complete? Do I have 100% of this record held inside my system? Is it consistent? If I compare one set with another set, can I see that there is that consistency is being applied in capture and storage? How unique is it? Is this something that provides my organization with a business advantage? Am I going to be able to do something new in the marketplace and have that competitive advantage? Is it accessible and timely? So can decision makers access the content in the right way at the right time in order to support their decision? Is it scarce? So how many processes does this help to deliver inside the organization? Is it interpretable? Is it believable? So these are all things that we need to start considering, and you can obviously pick from these. You can combine these in order to start thinking about what does information value really mean inside the organization. But there's the other side of the ledger. As well as value, we have to consider information as a liability. When we hold this content inside the organization, obviously it needs to be managed effectively, and we see things like the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, in Europe having huge impact right the way through the world, because we have customers in Europe, and that's helping us really focus in on, well, we are storing private and personal information about our customers. Are we protecting that? What happens if there is a data breach or a data loss. You know, what happens if one of my employees does leave their laptop on the train, and we've seen that happen too many times? Does its scarcity mean that it has a high market value, therefore it's going to be a target for theft? Might my reputation be impacted if this content is lost? Might I suffer a regulatory penalty because I haven't met some legislative requirement within my organization? So all of these conversations, both from a value and a liability perspective, help us consider the people, the work, and the systems that are enabling the flow of information through the organization as part of our digital twin model. These help us really focus in on the things that we must do inside the organization to maintain the value of this asset. This topic is being wrapped up in the term infonomics, which is all about the measurement, the management, and the monetization of information. There's a great book called Infonomics on the subject, written by Doug Laney, who was a Gartner analyst. He now works for Caserta Consultancy based in New York. I thoroughly recommend it if you are really interested in how to start considering information as an asset inside the organization, which will help you put some new governance structure around that content as part of this overall process. So once you've considered all of this, what are some of the practical applications of having a digital twin for the organization? Well, the first one is pretty straightforward. I can model what I do today, I can simulate an experiment with that change, and I can implement that change based on value. It does also contribute to information governance. We had a recent survey in Australia from Information Governance ANZ saying that actually implementing a governance strategy inside the organization is a top priority for businesses that are becoming data driven, but maturity needs to increase. Less than 50% of organizations are even at medium level maturity, and they don't necessarily have the roles in place inside the organization to manage this effectively. So the digital twin can help with our drive to have that top-down strategy for information governance inside the organization. There is definitely a knowledge that if we can become data literate in our organizations and have a level of literacy which is similar to some of the other languages that we've been talking about, this actually helps us thrive in the digital economy. We can talk about data in the same way. So we need to build a language around this, and there's the concept of information as a second language, taking English as a second language as the concept, where everyone can talk about data in the same way we talk about everything else that we do inside an organization. As human beings, we're great at just translating between people based on their experience and their knowledge of what I do. We need to have data as part of that conversation as well. And the fourth typical business case we see is this idea around building business case. Using value in order to do the interpretation of prioritization and getting to the decision point much faster. So with all of that said, what I'd like to do now, we've got maybe 25 minutes left, is we're going to run through a real example. So we're going to flip into some live demo inside the platform. We're going to look at an electric utility who wanted to understand the processes that they were undertaking in order to create their as-built plans for infrastructure build and have them signed off through their Q&A process. There's a lot of paper inside this organization. They're not really using a GIS platform for this. They're using MicroStation as a design tool. Lots and lots of paper, including paper going out into the field. They had some key objectives. One was to really understand their cost base for this. How could they become more efficient? How could they increase the cycle time, so do more? How could they make sure that the people inside the organization weren't over allocated in terms of their work? And primarily, how could we get rid of paper inside the organization? So we're going to flip across to the platform and we'll run through this case study. So before we get into just the case study, I just want to bring everyone up to a level of understanding about how do we take those concepts we've just been looking at in PowerPoint and bring them into Lync, the platform. Lync is a SaaS platform, so I'm just running in Chrome browser. It's hosted in AWS. It's fully secure. It's as secure as your banking platform. And we provide this to customers where they're able to have access to start doing their modeling and build their digital twins. It's based on that very simple language that we looked at in the slide. So I wanted to just reiterate that concept because it will help in terms of looking at some of the sketches that we're going to just dig into. So you can see here 4 different entities: information, action, system, people, colored green for information, orange for action, blue for systems, and purple for people. And the language is fixed. So I want to be able to think about the flow of information to start with. So here's a capture action. So this is how my information is created. This is the piece of information that has been created as a result. These 2 pieces of information enable this process to happen. This process is done by this person using this system. These pieces of information come from these systems. So this is the system that provides this content. I've got an external organization down here that's actually providing me with this piece of information. So we can look outside of our own business. You'll begin to see some numbers here. We've got $52,000 for the cost of this action. So this is made up by knowing this person costs us $100 an hour. That's their burdened hourly rate. And this action takes 2 hours to perform and happens 260 times a year. So we just multiply the hourly rate by the duration and the frequency in order to find the cost of the action. And this action down here is $13,000. So in total for this block, we've got $65,000 worth of cost. So that's what those numbers are. These costs are then allocated to the information outputs that are created. So I need to take this total cost here of $65,000 and allocate it across the 2 information outputs that are being created. So we've got one over here and we've got one over here, and you can see the numbers that are being provided. This is much higher because I've also got $52,000 worth of cost in this side of my twin model, which is only contributing to the cost of this output. So this is all worked out for you inside the platform. You really need to just understand the hourly cost of people, the hourly cost of systems, and how long actions take to happen, and the platform then works out the cost. The other aspect of this is value. So we take all of the value conversation and the liability conversation that we just looked at, and we distill that down to you coming up with a score between 0 and 10. So you could start very simply and think about the level of importance of the information assets that you create. You could go right to the other end of the spectrum and think about any of those 24 categorizations, weight them, value them, and then combine those scores to come up with a number between 0 and 10. So however you do that, at this information output level, we put the output value into our model. And then this cascades upstream through our flow. So you can see 10, I've put 10 here. If I change this to 9, you'll see the impact of that. Everything that enables this information output to be created has now been given the score 9. This flows down through the model until we find actions or information which enable more than one information output to be created. And at that point, the value combines. So here we've got 17, and that's the combination of 8 through this flow and 9 through this flow, making the people, the systems, the information, and the actions that happen in this part of the organization value 17. And that's how the value cascading works inside the platform to help you think about the priority of change that you might want to enable if you find things that are not as efficient. So how are these built? Very quick kind of speed demo on, I'm inside an organization and I'm having a conversation with them, and we're doing some capture, or you're a business analyst inside the organization, you have Lync as your platform, or you're a transformation lead, or you are a business process improvement expert inside the business, or project management of a PMO, a program manager, a project manager. So these are the typical people who are using the platform. So as the conversation's happening, I'm creating content in Lync. So here's a capture action, which might be create new account. So I can quite literally type the action that's created from create new account. I end up with an address. So you have to excuse my typing this morning. There's somebody's name, and there'll be a whole bunch of other content. What happens with the address? Well, this gets loaded into the GIS. So we'll load into GIS. So who's doing that? Well, there's a GIS analyst that has to do this work. So we're going to drop the person onto this action. So this is our GIS analyst. So people are individuals, their roles, or their teams in Lync. And depending on how we label them depends on how the analysis happens as through our insights. The tool that the GIS analysts use is the GIS. So we can put the system that they use. This address that's been created from our new account, well, let's suggest that it's not particularly efficient, and this happens in Excel. This might cause us to go, well, how's that new account created? Well, I might come down here and say, this is my customer, and the customer creates the new account, but they do it on paper. So the system here might be paper. So I can start using system in order to help me begin to understand the tools that are in use. And now at this point, I'd go, well, how does that address make it into Excel? So I can at any point say, well, I've missed a level of detail, so I want to insert content into the sketch in order to add the actual things that happen. So I'm very quickly able to deal with assumptions that might come through through the business. So you can see that we can very quickly, this will now be an address in the GIS. And it lives inside the GIS, so we can copy the system. And this is what I value. So this address might be high value for my business, so I'll put 10 in here. The name over here might not be quite as much value. Maybe it is an identifier. We might use it in a marketing list, so I might say that's a 7. And you can see immediately I've got a 17 in terms of value down here. So this is the way that Lync works. This is the conversation that we're having. We're taking that knowledge that's been provided by people as we talk to them, or even as they sit down as subject matter experts inside their part of the business, and they're building Lync sketches themselves. So we'll now jump and look at a completed sketch for the utility that we're going to talk about. So this is what a complete Lync sketch can look like. At the top, we've got our information outputs. So here you can see I've got the QA design that we're actually interested in. There's an asset management update. There's a printed map. And you can see the ultimate cost of producing these information outputs through the processes that are run inside this organization. So that's the cost allocation methodology that's running based on the cost of actions. You can also see this red flag, which is built from a critical path tag. So we've done a trace for all of the work that needs to happen, all of the information requirement, all of the people and the systems that allow us to deliver the QA design. So this red flag, you can see, runs right the way through the process. We've got value that's cascading. So the 10 and the 2 become a 12, plus the 10 become a 22. The mapping work record is a value 10 in its own right in the Access database. It delivers the resource plan. So we add 10 to the 22 to get 32, and so on. Here's the design that actually enables 4 new paths through the organization. So we might pick this and want to look downstream from this point to see everything that the design enables. So you can see in the top left-hand corner, I can build a snippet of my sketch in order to see the impact that any of these assets have on the rest of the work inside the organization. This process kicks off for this organization right down the bottom here, where we have 3 channels into the organization. So this is the customer. They're sending a paper request, an email, or a fax into the organization, ends up in this customer account creation box. And in here is nearly $300,000 worth of cost. So at that point, we might want to open this up so that we can look at the detail behind it and see, well, how are we incurring that cost in this organization? So this is the Lync language in full flow here, where we are modeling the information inputs that are created by the customer and then the work that gets done. So we'll quickly just look at what this means. So we can see that the customer creates this content, but then this manual service request takes place. This is done by the engineer inside the asset management system. And because the engineer costs us $70 an hour, and this manual service request creation action, it takes them 20 minutes, and they do it 5,500 times a year. This is how we get $128,000 of cost for this action. We then look at the flow. So we've ended up as one of our outputs being the service request, but this now has to be validated by the engineer and the customer liaison. So they call every customer. They do it 5,500 times a year. On average, this call takes 15 minutes. So this creates $165,000 worth of cost. So in order for this organization to end up with a validated service request, request inside the asset management system, they're all interpreting it. But back to that conversation about what about the decision maker? They're not necessarily as IT savvy as we'd like them to be, despite the fact that this is a fairly simple structure using just 4 elements. It's just boxes and lines. We don't necessarily want them to get into this detail unless they have to. So what's happening with Link in the background is we are generating these insights. So this happens the moment that we start capturing content inside the canvas here. So let's have a look at this, and this really is where the value comes from this digital twin. This is allowing us to assess the organization in terms of the cost of doing work, the value of that work, who's involved, what's involved. So we can start determining whether we're happy with everything. Then we can think about that next part of the process, which is based on that value conversation aligned with strategic objectives. How do I simulate change, build a future state, understand the difference between these 2 points in time in order to have a data-driven conversation with the executive? So inside this part of the organization, to have that QA design, we are spending nearly $7 million, and it's taking us 94,500 hours, and we've got 0 automation. So every action is done by somebody. And this translates across to, well, we've almost got a 1-to-1 ratio between information assets and actions. So every action we perform is creating content that enables the next action. So there's very little reuse, which we can also see here. We might go and look at cost and value. So this chart looks at each block of the sketch, looks at the total cost inside that part of the sketch against the value that it delivers. So we can use this, think of a 2x2 matrix. The bottom right-hand corner, this is high value, low cost. So we've got capacity planning, and we've got customer account creation. And we might look at this and say, well, if it's such high value, why are we actually spending relatively low amount of money on this part of the business? If we invest here, can we achieve more? So we can drive a conversation just from this graphic. Up here, we've got high cost and low value, the as-built posted part of the process. So we can select this and now go and find it on the sketch. So here's as-built posted. We might jump in here. Now I can drive the somebody who's interested to the right part of the sketch, so they're not having to understand everything. And if we look inside this this part of the organization, we can see there's a lot of paper. This is where the paper really kicks in. We've got work packets as paper. They get sent to the foreman and get loaded into the asset management system. Then they get printed out on paper. The as-built's done on paper. The check is done on paper, and so on. You can immediately begin to see the challenge that this organization has. We might look at people inside the business. So here this is the full time, that's the 94,500 hours. So we'll look at the people involved, and we can arrange by hours in order to understand the work that goes on. So designer jumps straight to the top of the list, 29,000 hours of that total time has been spent by them. Again, we can select the designer in the sketch, and we can see where they are doing their work. So everything's become highlighted in the sketch. But what does that really mean? So let's go and jump across to the people dashboard, and we'll be able to interpret what we found by connecting people to the work that they do. So this is a full list of everybody that we have captured inside our sketch. When this loads, we'll pick the designer. So they appear 10 times. And now we can look at their workload. We can look at cost versus value. So top right-hand corner, we've got high cost, high value, the creating the design. We've got the site visit and the pre-design. Lower value, high cost, we've got creating the work packet. We've got create a permit request. So we can really quickly analyze what they're doing. We've got a sketch here which helps us understand the systems that they use and how they enable our business outcomes to be delivered. So we might assess this against our expectation of the role. We might find things that just organically over time we have had them start to do because no one else has been able to do it, or it's just naturally happened, and we might want to reallocate that. We can understand their allocation by looking at the total time that we've captured against this role and the cost. So 29,000 hours of time, 1.8 million, nearly $1.9 million worth of cost. Now, if we had 10 designers in our team, So on average, they're doing 2,900 hours a year. We would know they're very over allocated, and obviously that has an impact to the organization. We have employee churn. Perhaps the employee experience has been impacted. That is very likely to be impacting the customer experience because of the mood inside the organization, because people are grumpy, because of the amount of work they're being asked to do. So these dashboards quickly start providing a different level of insight into the business based on the relationships that we're able to model. So we'll jump back to the, oh, an error occurred. That's no good. We're going to jump back to the canvas. Let's reopen this model. Just let this load. There's always something that happens when you're doing things live, so it's to be expected. So we're back into the sketch. We'll open Insights again. Another thing we might be interested in, the systems that we're using. So we've got a system pivot, which lets us look at the value of the system against the number of outcomes that are supported. So if we look down here, we can see there's the asset management system, but we have paper as a system. Here we've got the printer and the phone. So these are verbal conversations that are happening. The printer is obviously being used to create content. Here is inter-office delivery. So this is paper being moved around in the organization in manila envelopes or in the trolley that people rely on. So if we look at this, we can obviously see where it is inside the business, but I want to know the impact of inter-office delivery on the whole of the organization. So this now lets us consider, where does this take place in the business? So we've got 63% reliance on meeting our business outcome is using the inter-office delivery, and these are the people who rely on that system. So the designers in here, the engineers in here. So we're beginning to build this view up of what happens inside this business based on our reliance of paper. In fact, we've got paper as a system, so we can select that, and we can see nearly 100% of the business relies on paper as part of the mechanism for the transference of knowledge through the business. The printer is obviously critical as well because of the amount of paper that's being printed, $1.77 million worth of cost. And so we might want to now fully understand, how is that cost made up? So our $6.89 million, $1.9 million is spent on printing maps. The QA design that we're interested in is $1.08 million, so just over $1 million worth of cost. How is that made up? We can assess the QA design. We can see all of the actions that we've recorded that allocate costs to the creation of the QA design. So we're really digging into the construct of our business. This is the digital representation of what goes on. Some of it might not be particularly nice to look at, but this is reality, and it's important that we model reality, not what we hoped goes on or wished goes on. And there's one interesting aspect we're able to deliver inside the model is, as we are going through and capturing our current state, we can use these tags in order to identify the critical path of things, but also what might the opportunity be to do things differently. So we can jump into the impact assessment and use some of these tags that we're driving inside the organization to help us understand what's going on. So the critical path that we've tagged, which is, how do we build our QA design? If we select this, we can see that contributes to $3.5 million worth of cost and is currently taking 58,000 hours. These are the 11 systems that we use in order to deliver that. What if I was to automate actions currently performed manually? So let's look at the automate tag. Well, if I did that, I could immediately save $1.62 million of operational cost a year, and I could give people 25,000 hours back across the organization. So even within the current state, we're able to start doing the type of analysis which helps us understand the impact of things that we want to change within the organization. And what this leads us to is, we can build a future state or many future states. So let's take a quick look at that. So jump across to the future state sketch, exactly the same language, so we won't go into the sketch right now. I just want to show you the result this organization had through that full understanding of what they were doing, why they were doing it, how they were doing it. They have removed paper from the organization. So let's quickly look at systems in order to set some context. We can see, first of all, we've reduced the number of systems. There are fewer bubbles on this chart. Up here, we've still got the phone, we've still got the portal and the asset management system, but here we have the work management system that's been put in place, and this bubble is Small World GIS and mobile mapping. So this leads us to understand that the idea here is to remove paper from the organization. In fact, if we go back to our summary and we look at the value of the work that gets done, we can see things have moved. This is the as-built posted process, which was the one where all of the paper was. And if we go and jump in and have a look inside this model, this part of the model, we'll be able to see that we have removed the paper. We've got some files that are being transferred now. We're using the work management system, we're using Small World, we're using mobile mapping. So we can make sure that the organization fully understand the impact. Let's go and have a look at the designer. So this was a key role that we were interested in. What's the impact of the change had on them? So again, we'll use the drop-down list, we'll find the designer, and we can see how we've managed to impact that role. So they're only represented 4 times now. It was 10 previously. It was $1.8 million. We've halved that. They're only using 3 systems, not 5, down to nearly 14,000 hours. So we've more than halved that for under $1 million worth of cost. So we've streamlined their work now, and we can look at this. We can use this chart, this small sketch here, to make sure that we've included all of the critical things, all the valuable work that we want them to do inside the organization. But this now becomes how we make sure they have the training that they need to use the new systems. We can engage with them early in the process. Remember, we haven't actually done anything yet. We are just simulating what we'd like to do inside the model. So once I understand this, I can go and start including the designers in the conversation. I can bring them on the journey with me. I can prevent the pushback from change because I engage with them quickly. And if there are things that they then start telling me about the role that need to remain the same, then I can start to include that in my model. So the future state sketches really do help us just have that conversation inside the organization. In terms of cost, we can obviously go and have a look and see how things have changed. We've got the QA design is now under $250,000, and this block down here, we're only spending $47,000 now on printing maps. Previously, that was $1.75 million. So how do we do this comparison really quickly? So we've got a compare function. This allows us to take the current state digital twin. So in the Apollo 13, this is what's happening in space. This is what's happening on the ground. So this is our future state. And let's compare those 2 sketches. And we get a quick dashboard, which helps us build the conversation with our executive. We're going to take operational costs per year from $6.89 million to $1.65 million, saving $5.24 million. Well, right there's a conversation that I guess would grab somebody's attention. They'll want to know more. And at the same time, we're going to put nearly 60,000 hours back into the organization. Now, obviously, care has to be taken with this type of analysis. Are we getting rid of people as part of this process? Are we reallocating them? And obviously, most organizations I've been to and we've worked with, there's not a shortage of work that needs to be done but doesn't necessarily get done because the inbox is so full. So this is a conversation that begins to address that. You can focus on the things that deliver value inside the organization. This might mean people can stick their head up above the parapet, have a look around, start contributing to change because they've got time to do some innovation. You might want to give them time to think and be curious about new technologies and how they might help the organization. So that all comes from understanding how we can impact the work that people are doing, make them more efficient. We can very quickly see the people that are impacted and who do we need to go and have a conversation with. So the people that are unique to our current state are the people that we are going to impact in terms of their role. And the primary conversation we'd need to have here is with the on-site print contractor. They're about to lose a $1.7 million contract with us for printing our maps. Yes, you hope you've got a good contract with them where you can potentially get out of that as part of this change. And we'd want to go and have the conversation with IT about the systems that we're going to remove from the organization. And indeed the systems that we're going to introduce into the business. So there is an opportunity here to make sure that they understand the impact on the mail server, on the asset management system, on the Access database. Start thinking about licensing and how we remove that cost from the business, as well as the introduction of new technology. So we want to put Small World in, we want to put mobile mapping in. There's obviously a need for training and support around that. So this dashboard very quickly gets us to the point where we can have these conversations inside the organization. Okay, that's it from me. I'm going to hand back to Dave now, and we'll close out. So we're just going to flip across to back to the PowerPoint, and we'll go to the final slide. So Dave, back to you.
Very good, thank you, Neil. So yeah, just before we have, we're going to have a few minutes for a few questions. So if you have, I've seen one or two submitted. So if you have any questions, please throw those in there. If we don't get to them today, we'll get back to you. But on this slide, I just wanted to kind of just do a quick review of what you saw and the capabilities of what's in it for me as far as digital twinning. Certainly understanding the value and cost of status quo, you saw that in the current state sketch, and the implications of investment decisions. The line we said earlier, spend thousands before millions. Certainly, using a digital twin, you can kind of see the future and what the impacts are. Evaluating and improving your processes. This goes down to eliminating waste, isolating high value improvements, and then establishing business cases in in the language of business. It's pretty easy to look at those dashboards and see the difference between current state and the value of the future state. And simulating those future state scenarios. What if we did this? What if we went with this vendor? What if we went with that vendor? How would our organization be impacted? And actually do it fact-based rather than everyone's more of a opinion-based. So yeah, that's just wanted to emphasize those few points in closing, and we'll go to the questions. Let's see here. Okay, here's one for you, Neil. Is anyone using this for efficiency questions, i.e. modeled costs are X, actual costs are Y? Why is that?
Oh, that's a great question, because it's kind of the reverse of the more traditional approach, which is these are my actual costs, what might my modeled costs be? So is anyone using that? To be perfectly honest, I don't really know. There's absolutely no reason why you couldn't do that, because there's nothing to stop you from saying this is the model of my the expectation that I have for this process inside the organization, where I want my costs to be, and then go and model your current states and find out what's actually going on. So the only difference there is the start point. You're almost building the future state is really your expected state, and then you still need to know where you are today in terms of current state. So the process that we have shown is exactly it's the same. It's just the mindset would be slightly different in terms of the order that you do that capture. So there's absolutely no reason. And yes, of course, it would start helping you identify the things that were going on inside the organization which might not be meeting expectations in terms of cost or time or value.
Yeah, and I think it goes to the continuous improvement, right? When the future state becomes your current state, you look at, okay, we said in the future before that it was going to take this amount of time to do a certain job. Well, for whatever reason, it's actually this number. You plug in those numbers and boom, you have these are the new actuals, and you start the process over again. What are we doing wrong? Why is that job taking so long? And you start to dig into why, and the whole thing repeats itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about that with the disruption of the decision cycle and the fact that you have those measures and metrics which are your targets for success. So absolutely, it fits into that part of the process as well.
There's another one here. I don't know if we can answer it, but I'll put it out there anyway. Can a regional power system and market be modeled this way? Would it be too much information to manipulate?
Well, yeah, I guess it's going to be a pretty significant model. Modeling a market would be interesting. That strikes me that it would be a similar process to thinking about the customer journey, because that's really how a market's defined. How, what are customers looking for, the experience they're after, the product or service that they're after. How is the market, I guess, responding to that in terms of pricing and availability of power, creation of power. So as long as you think about the information side of that, so you can introduce that concept into the model, there's no reason why not. You'd have to iterate there. So as with all of these things, it's making a start that is often the challenge, but if that was the objective that you were trying to achieve, then there's no reason why you couldn't get to the point where you can think about both of those examples. Would it be too much to manipulate? I think that's the whole point behind having the insights, is they are doing the work for you. So yes, the model itself may become complicated and quite large, but you can always then just use the dashboarding and the insights to interpret what's been captured. So that's a way that you would maintain the knowledge that was needed and help share the knowledge would be through the insights. There was a bit to that as well about an example of a power pool digital twin being done. Now, the main examples we have right now are within organizations that have been modeling specific processes. So how do I deliver this product, or how do I enable this outcome to be delivered in terms of the people and the processes that are involved? So really core aspects of delivering outcome to customers has been the primary focus within the utility sector.
Very good. Thank you, Neil. Looks like we are right at the end, so I'm going to hand it back to you, PJ.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Neil. Fantastic presentations. For our audience, we hope you've enjoyed today's discussion. As you log off, please take a moment to complete our survey and give us your feedback so that we can continue to provide you with quality content. Thank you for attending. This does conclude today's presentation.